it's beyond a simple question of access, but you really delve into the questions of affordability and adoption and bringing other data sets into the conversation. I truly believe that is an approach that's really catching fire.
Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in St. Paul, Minnesota. Today I'm bringing back a really fun guest we've had on a few times at this point, Mr. Matt Schmidt, who is currently the director of the Illinois Office of Broadband and chair of the Illinois Broadband Advisory Council. Welcome back.
Christopher, great to join you.
It's really great to have you back. People can start their watches in 20 minutes. Minnesota Gophers start playing, and I'll put that on the background and just start ignoring you, so the questions will be like less relevant.
You're going to do the same thing. We're going to be in trouble.
So we met at the University of Minnesota, and even though you're in Evanston now, I'm curious. Are you turning into more of a Northwestern fan? Sticking with the Big Ten? Are you staying with the Minnesota roots?
Well, I have to tell you, it's been a joy seeing all these Big Ten teams pass through town, and I've been able to remain a Gopher fan from afar. And so I did on a very cold day in the fall of 2019, watch the Gopher football team beat up on the Wildcats. But I'm a Gopher through and through. Excellent.
And the other thing I'll say is that, just so people know, we're recording this on a Sunday, and I think it's hilarious because I view this is a great opportunity for me, and you felt bad that we're talking on a weekend, and I'm just glad to get a piece of your schedule, So I think it's also worth noting that you're a pretty nice guy. So,
well, there's a lot going on in broadband these days, so I think you and I are staying busier than perhaps we were a year or two ago.
Yes. So what's happening in Illinois? I feel like you guys may be more prepared than almost any other state because Illinois made one of the largest, and I mean, you could argue, but possibly the largest commitment of its own dollars to broadband before all this federal money came out. And you were the only one really prepared to spend big bucks in some ways.
Yeah, turn back the clock to 2019, and Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly, they invested $420 million in broadband as part of their historic $45 billion Rebuild Illinois package. And so I just really give credit to leaders in the state of Illinois for anticipating, I think, the wisdom of the investment in broadband, of putting the magnitude of funding behind the broadband vision that was needed. And Connect Illinois has really taken off since. And so I think that the state of Illinois is very well prepared to receive, truly historic dollars, whether it's the infrastructure bill or ARPA, and apply those to broadband. And so you look at the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program. We're ready to apply those federal dollars straight to that program and double down on an investment that we all know is going to be very wise and stand the test of time.
When you combine this with the unprecedented federal investments through the rescue plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, slowly going.
You got it.
And a few other things. I kind of wonder if you have a murder board in your office that has all these strings between these different things, to try and figure out how to tell the difference between these different pots of money. Is that a challenge?
Well, I think what's been good to see so far is the close alignment between the state approach in Illinois and what Treasury rule for the Capital Projects Fund included. And so you see a thread that's historic that goes from Treasury to Illinois to Minnesota, and a lot of the best practices that have been stood up over the past decade. And I think that consistency is really helpful for a state like Illinois. The state doesn't need to really change anything. I think when you look at the values that are applied to its Connect Illinois grant program, what's been articulated in Treasury's rule, I think there's just a lot of similarity there. And I'm hoping that we're going to see that with NTIA and their BEAD program. That's going to help states like Illinois and many others that have really built upon the best practices that have been established over the last decade. And so hopefully that's what we see in the year ahead.
Now, I feel like the changes to the Treasury program's rescue plan dollar rules, the final rule came out just recently, and made it significantly less complicated for local governments to choose to invest in areas where there may already be service. And one might do this because areas may have a level of service that is not actually meeting local needs because of affordability or bureaucratic barriers or whatever. And so I think, I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about kind of urban and rural. And I mean, it might get a little bit messy as we go through this, I think, because there's so many different things to reference. So as we're kind of heading into this section of the interview, let me ask you to start by thinking about, like, what have you done in Illinois on urban versus rural? Are they kind of different approaches? Like, how do you tease those apart?
First and foremost, I just think it's important to establish that this is not a rural broadband challenge. It is a statewide broadband challenge. And with that comes the opportunity and the funding to address shortcomings in broadband, whether it's access or adoption or use holistically around the state. And so from day one in Illinois, the message has been to engage folks at the local level, the regional level, in all corners of the state, that if we're going to take advantage of the historic state commitment to broadband, which has now become an historic federal commitment to broadband, that you really have to have an all hands on deck approach, that folks in all communities around the state that see, shortcomings with the broadband status quo have a path forward. And so almost from day one, we stood up programming that supported that kind of conversation at the local level. The Illinois Connected Communities program, which really has been instrumental in engaging local communities, whether they're neighborhoods in Chicago or counties spread out around rural parts of the state, or really anything in between. We wanted to give those communities an opportunity to engage with experts, with facilitation, best practice curriculum, to think through where they are currently on the broadband spectrum and where they want to be with their broadband vision in the years ahead, and how to take specific steps, whether it's an access, adoption, or utilization, to making that vision a reality. And so just hats off to the Benton Institute and local philanthropy, the University of Illinois Extension Services, for partnering with the Illinois Office of Broadband to stand up this program. And we're in the midst of the second cohort. So now over 20 communities have engaged with us in making this program a success. And we hope to launch the third round of the Illinois Connected Communities program in the months ahead. I should also add, Christopher, though, there's a wrinkle to this. With the federal funding that came down, we recognize that a lot of communities are in a position to invest ARPA dollars available to them specifically. And so we recently launched our Accelerate Illinois program, a 14-week crash course in really empowering local governments to think through how they can use those ARPA dollars, come after the state for Connect Illinois infrastructure dollars, perhaps partner on reconnect applications, to have a large community role in broadband access. And so I think that those two programs we're really proud of, again, strengthening that hand of the local community and the community voice.
Well, I hope our mutual friend Bill Coleman hasn't slowed anyone down too much.
Yeah, Bill's been hard at work in Illinois, that's for sure.
I just say that because I'm sure that he'll listen to this interview with you and I in it. And Bill does great work. He's done a lot of work for many years with the Blandon Foundation, and I was thrilled to see he's getting active helping Illinois communities, and just really great to help people understand what their options are and get into this industry without a bunch of jargon confusing them.
Well, let me say this. Folks from Minnesota have been in high demand around the country over the last couple of years, and that's certainly true with the federal investment that we've seen. So we're glad that we've got that capacity to share with the rest of the country. Okay.
So I asked you to look at a thread that Larry Irving got kicked up, and Catherine DeWitt, Scott Rasmussen, and Peggy Schaefer, all of whom I think are leading voices on this broadband challenge across the country, kind of going back and forth. And I want to pin you down a little bit more on what's going on in Illinois in urban areas, because I think Larry asked a really good question, which is basically like, does anyone care, and is anyone doing anything at the state level on urban broadband challenges? Because it's so often we just hear about it with regard to the rural, and the Biden rules from the Treasury originally created unnecessary roadblocks for urban areas that have now been removed, to their credit. And the question is, I think, will states and I think, I think it's pretty clear to me that I'll let you off the hook a little bit. I do want to know what Illinois has done, but I think Illinois, New York, and California have shown some leadership on this. And the question is, are there 10 other states that will be showing leadership on urban broadband challenges? But let me start by asking, what have you done in urban areas specifically in Illinois?
Yeah, well, first of all, as I'd mentioned before, I mean, just establishing that they're part of the conversation with Connect Illinois, the vision for utilizing state resources to improve broadband connectivity, adoption, and utilization. And so we've had regular conversations with folks at the city, with Chicago Public Schools, with Cook County, and others throughout urban areas in Illinois, just to make clear that the Office of Broadband is here to support their vision and partner with them to take next steps. And so I know that there's a lot of energy at the city in Cook County, in the city of Chicago Public Schools. I serve on the Council for Digital Equity that is run by Cook County and President Preckwinkle. And that's, I think, an opportunity for the State Office of Broadband to hear from local leaders and think through, again, their vision and try to align state, federal resources with that on the ground, I guess, challenge and opportunity that we think is instrumental into making these dollars turn into wise investments. And so what we're doing, I think, just establishing that they're part of the solution, that we take seriously their challenges, and that we want to find a path forward to make their visions a reality. And so I'll just tell you this, round one of Connect Illinois included a project in Cook County, expanding institutional fiber network to hard to reach areas, connecting some of their facilities. And the hope is that, we'll see more of that both in Chicago and Cook County and around the state.
When you talk with other state leaders, do you view it as kind of your goal is to make sure that is, being part of the conversation? Because I do think, and this is something that I think you and I should talk about, the politics around this is not just that there's bad people who refuse to recognize the challenge of urban areas, where we have low income neighborhoods that are not well connected to the internet, often because of affordability gaps. But although there's a tremendous amount of digital inclusion work that needs to be done as well, the simple fact is that right now it seems really challenging to make that point. When you talk with other people from other states, do you have a sense that they are also focused on urban challenges? Or you kind of nudge them in that direction?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I don't know where every state is on this question of balance between rural and urban broadband investment and programming. My view is that the conversation nationally has changed significantly in the last 2 years, and that simply looking at a broadband access map based upon FCC 4477 data, or hopefully something that's more accurate, timely, and granular. The point is, it's beyond a simple question of access, but you really delve into the questions of affordability and adoption, and bringing other data sets into the conversation. I truly believe that is an approach that's really catching fire, and that you're seeing, throughout the country, a more holistic approach to, thinking about where broadband is and isn't, and the different inputs to that very question. I think states are feeling their way forward on this one. I mean, I think that you look at, federal, rule, you look at historic definitions of unserved and underserved. You have to reconcile that with, I think, like we just said, a recognition that affordability and adoption data is just as important. And so when you look at the digital divide, we're trying to address it, holistically. Access is one part of that. A lack of computers is another. Digital equity skills and literacy is another piece of that. But that there may be maps that'll show that access is sufficient in urban areas, but whether it's digital redlining or other insufficiencies, those maps just really don't tell the whole story. And I think that's the hard work that really has to be done. And so right now we're starting, to really lean into conversations with the University of Chicago, City of Chicago, Chicago Public Schools, in having a better understanding of where broadband is and isn't, and other barriers to adoption. Because if folks aren't using what's out there, well, there's a problem. We really want to do what we can to, inspire full use and put our communities in position to get the most out of not only the assets that are currently in the ground, but also those that are going to be invested in through this, again, historic, state and federal funding.
Now, you represent, as we kind of continue, but we're almost done with the urban rural, from my outline of where we want to cover. You represented a rather red part of Minnesota now in the Minnesota legislature as a Democrat. And so I know that you are not a super partisan person. You're a person who looks for solutions, and I just want to get that out there, because what I'm about to say is that, like, I find it frustrating that when I talk to people, I get this sense that, like, that they think of, like, oh, the Republicans are out there trying to solve the problem in rural areas, and Democrats are trying to solve the problem in urban areas, and, like, that's kind of the problem. Whereas I look at it and I say we had 4 years of the Trump administration, and they put into place a pretty decent reconnect program that I'm pretty happy with. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork, but, like, I think it's give them credit for that. They put more money into that, but they didn't really do anything. The Democrats came in and they put a historic amount of money out there for both urban and even more for rural. And so I look at it and I just feel like there's a political issue that, like, I don't really see anyone. I shouldn't say anyone. I see far too few people championing the challenges we have in urban areas, and everyone talking, all the Democrats talking about rural challenges, and then Republicans often just not doing very much on broadband from my perspective. And so I'm just curious, as someone who's followed politics, been inside of it, how do you view the challenge of politics right now for getting money to solve the broadband challenge in the right areas to where it's needed?
The world has changed over the last couple of years. That's an understatement, right? I think we all used to rally around the notion that broadband is an area of investment and that would garner support from both sides of the aisle, that there was not a rural, urban split on, and that really there was broad consensus that this was a good investment. I think when you really start to look at this, though, I mean, I think some of the differences that you may see in the parties, as role of government, and whether or not, big public investments should be made into this, I think the pandemic has pretty much settled that question. I mean, it's not going to get done if there's not, strong public-private partnership and significant public funding to build out networks and to make this investment. So it's great to see what the year 2021 produced on the broadband front in terms of the magnitude of investment. It's sorely needed. And so that's good, right? I think getting into the question about, where the energy and the support for this has come from. I know in my time in the Minnesota legislature, I mean, we certainly faced obstacles, and they weren't just, from, the
one
usual
party
suspects.
You had multiple parties.
And so, I think a lot of that, folks might have bought into the notion that, what was out there was good enough and that public investment wasn't needed. And okay, the pandemic has really established that just isn't true, that you need that public investment on the broadband space. I think moving forward, because of how partisan things are, and the fact that if you look at a broadband access map, it really does show that a lot of the areas are rural that need infrastructure investment. I do think it's important for this conversation politically to take on a balanced approach where you are, striking the share of resources to infrastructure, into adoption, into use, and also questioning whether or not historic assumptions of what is sufficient infrastructure really pass the test of time. And so that's why one of the reasons that we've been very intentional about making this a statewide effort of showing that there are investments to be made in urban and rural areas. And I think that that's going to be really important for us collectively to get the most out of this moment. Okay, the investment's been made, but the work is just beginning now. And so I think it's going to be important for, local leaders, for state leaders, for folks at the national level to recognize that we all benefit if we do this right. And that these investments, many of them will flow to rural areas. That's not the only area that's going to be invested in. That there are urban areas that are going to be much better off because of the broadband investment through the infrastructure bill, through ARPA, and others. We absolutely need this investment to put our urban areas and our rural areas in a position to compete. And so, I think we're going to feel our way forward on what that balance looks like. And it may, look like, different kinds of investments in different parts of the state. But I think that we all have something very concrete to benefit from if done right. Sorry, I go on and on here, Christopher, but I think it's a good question.
On the subject of these political issues, I do have to say, I feel like earlier you said that Minnesota people are in high demand. I kind of wonder if everyone who cares about broadband at the political level has left Minnesota. Because I see people that are trying to do good work here and there. And I mean, Angie Dickinson in the state office, I think, is doing good work. But I don't see a legislative leader on this raising it up. It seems to me like if there's a bipartisan agreement in Minnesota, it's that broadband is boring and they're not interested in it. In the governor's office, frankly, I can't tell what they're thinking. I just don't see any leadership on this historic money that's coming to Minnesota. And I just find it so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I think Minnesota's lost its momentum for sure, and I think that's getting out nationally. I think the state still has a grant program, an office, a general approach that I think has served as a model. I mean, you look at what Treasury did with their rules, what Illinois has done with other states. I mean, that thread that began or certainly was stood up in Minnesota is around the country. I mean, you see it in statute across the state or across the country. But you got to invest, and you can't just sit back and I think expect that momentum is going to carry forward. I think the infusion of federal dollars is an opportunity for the state to hit reboot, get that 2.0 version moving. But I would agree with you watching from afar. I think that if the state's going to be a leader in broadband, we need a fresh set of leaders who are coming in and going to elevate the issue. And it's not simply about, meeting, very basic goals about 25/3 around the state, but rather positioning the state to compete in the 21st century, putting the state in a position to be at the forefront of innovative approaches to broadband investment, adoption, and use. I just see a complete dearth of energy, as you say, and it's not calling out anyone in particular, but I think from the top on down, I think that you just really need to prioritize broadband. I remember the campaign trail in 2018. There was some talk, $300 million for broadband from the state. Well, I never saw that materialize. And I don't even think I've seen it materialize with the federal dollars that have been devoted.
And you're probably aware that, and other people may not be aware who are listening, but people talk about how states don't have printing presses of cash. Well, we do right now. We have insane, just crazy levels of surpluses that will result in a lot of good spending potential while also potentially allowing to give taxpayers back some money. And so this isn't a time where we're like, oh, we got to cut the schools in order to fund broadband.
Well, it's interesting. So you bring this up. It actually reminds me back in, I think it was 2014 when we had stood up the Office of Broadband the year before. And we were going into that session with a historic budget surplus in Minnesota. And I think there was a young legislator who went around the state talking about broadband and brought some ideas back into the session that year. And I think the point was it was the perfect use of one-time funds because broadband connectivity is a challenge that can be solved and it can be solved through one-time funds. There are no tails on these dollars, so to speak. You put the funding in programming and investments that can achieve their results, achieve universal connectivity and access around the state, and then you can move on to the next big challenge. And so I look at Minnesota. I think it's in a great position right now if they wanted to double down on broadband, and whether it's through their current border-to-border broadband grant program or something that's a little bit more fresh and innovative. I think that brings more of the state into view. Recognizing that again, 25/3, the federal basic broadband benchmark. I mean, it allows one person at home to do remote learning or work from home, not two, not three, but one.
Right.
I think taking a second look at those goals and taking a second look at the pace of investment, I think would really serve leaders in Minnesota well. But that's an opportunity that they have, a $7 billion opportunity, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I've been assuming that there would be very little opposition to a new broadband standard that's 100/20. I think, some of us will be pushing for it to be still more aggressive because we're concerned about the fact that it may not move again. If, for instance, we have a new FCC with a new administration and in the actual presidential elections, we may be picking a broadband definition that's for 6 or 7 or 10 years. You never know.
Right.
But anyway, so I think that's a good point. But I want to move to a different question, which is the actual challenges of running a state broadband office. So what have you learned along the way in terms of vetting ISPs? Because this is really a big problem with the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund program at the FCC that many of us think they didn't do a good enough job vetting. And so you have companies that have significant likely challenges to meeting the obligations they're trying to take on. Right. So in Illinois, let's just say for a second that I form Mitchell's con artist broadband LLC and I come and I start trying to get some
Watch
loans.
out.
What are you doing to make sure that I'm not what my name says I am?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think as states that are standing up broadband grant programs for the first time right now, they're going to have to really deal with this in how they get savvy in short order, and can separate the wheat from the chaff and focus their investments accordingly. For our part, we're very meticulous in terms of our merit review process, and I think you see that in states that have stood up grant programs over the last decade. Very specific goals in terms of scalability. So we want to be able to get to 100 symmetrical service. Also, in terms of like the financials that an ISP or a broadband provider or an applicant would be bringing to the table, we want to see that they've done this before and not just trust that their good ideas and the resumes they share with us are enough. And also, you look at you get on their website, you see how they talk about things, you see what they've done. We have fuel validation crews that can get out and actually see what kind of service is being provided in the areas that they serve. And so there are ways in which you're able to really apply close scrutiny to their financials, to the work that they've done, the level of service that they are providing. That's all part of what really needs to happen in due diligence before you award a grant. And so that's, I think, a lesson for all states. As you set up an Office of Broadband, the idea that you're going to move this level of federal funding with, 2 people or 3 people is just foolish. You absolutely have to have the expertise, whether it's in-house or through consultants, to vet good projects, to vet broadband providers. Our goal has been in Illinois, and you see it elsewhere. Don't make one mistake. You don't want to have one project, blow up where you funded a provider to do work and they didn't do the job right. I think that's a high standard, but it's one that I think is really important for offices of broadband to set for themselves. And so putting that team together, that's a key point now. You got to have that technical expertise. You've got to have folks from the grants management accountability standpoint that can work closely with your grantee and make sure they're doing what they're required to do. And then following it on the back end. And whether you've got a mapping vendor or you've got others that you've got, a part of your team that can go out and do that field validation work to again, confirm that the work that was paid for through your grant agreement is the resulting product. That's part of the operation. And so again, it's not a 2 or 3 person undertaking. You've really got to build out a team, especially when you look at the dollars. I mean, states are going to be moving $100 million by the end of the year, $200 million at some point next year, $500 million, $1 billion within the next 5 years. You've got to have that capacity to not just move the dollars, but to do it wisely.
And do you do most of that work on staff then for Illinois?
Yeah. So with I'll just speak to the Illinois model. It's been a very lean operation, and I hope the state's able to build out in the year ahead. But you have a director, a grants manager, a couple of consultants who help with the merit review process, who can read through a 100-page application and know what's being proposed in terms of technology, spot red flags, look at the financials and make sense of strengths and weaknesses of a broadband provider's financial footing. And then, in the case of Illinois, there is, a mapping vendor that not only collects data from providers, but also is under contract to go out and validate that the work is done to spec, and also validate the broadband, access data that's provided to us. And so I think that you look at the team, you've got a focus on policy, you've got to focus on grants management, you've got to focus on technical expertise in grants review. So looking at the applications that they come in, and then on the back end, we also have the capacity for validating that the work's getting done, and that, well, again, on the data front, that the mapping is as accurate as possible. So the piece I haven't focused on here is the importance of having that community outreach and engagement. And this kind of circles back to a point that you brought up previously. Clarity that communities can use their ARPA dollars for broadband. Any state should be encouraging those communities to do just that. And not only encouraging them to do it, but assisting them. And through community engagement and local planning, capacity building, programming, I think that is what's going to turn a historic funding opportunity through ARPA and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into transformative investment that's going to solve this, broadband connectivity challenge, for a generation. And so that's the point that we've really been stressing is we want to see local leaders lean into this broadband question. We want to see them invest their ARPA dollars, infrastructure dollars in broadband. And we also want to support them in doing so. And so we talked about that, Connected Communities program. We talked about the Accelerate program. Those sorts of things are really important. And I guess I would just speak to this, in setting up your ideal office of broadband around the country. This is something that you can invest in or not. But if you've got folks who can engage with communities in-house, I think it's going to improve your output and in what you're seeing from your local communities. And so that's why I think you look at the ideal office of broadband. You could have 4 or 5 people doing the work that I spoke of previously. But if you're actually going to be serious about that community engagement and helping local governments and communities seize this opportunity, you probably need the same amount of people doing that kind of work. And so you get to 8, 10, 12 people just like that. That's what an ideal office of broadband looks like in the year 2022. If you're going to take advantage of all the federal funding that's coming down the pike and put our communities, not just our broadband providers, which I appreciate, but our communities in a position to be active in this investment.
It's interesting because I feel like you have the capability potentially to release like an official Illinois map. I don't think you've done that, but what you're saying is that you have the capacity to make sure that you know what you need to know on a mapping front.
Yeah, we actually do have. In Illinois, we stood up the Illinois Broadband Lab. It's a collaboration with University of Illinois. We have University of Chicago, the Benton Institute, and our mapping vendor, Connected Nation. And so we're all working together on data collection and mapping. And so the mapping vendor has their specific contract to execute in terms of broadband access data collection and field validation. But we're very interested in making sure that we're bringing other data sets into the equation. And so whether it's, American Community Survey data, it's other data around adoption and utilization, just getting as holistic a view of what, the broadband situation is in terms of, again, access, adoption, use. That's what we're striving for right now. And so we do have an Illinois broadband map. It's both on our website and also on the Illinois Broadband Lab website. And I would just say this, I think currently the iteration is in line with a historic way of looking at broadband. I think over time, we really look to include more information on adoption, on pricing, on other elements that contribute to the digital divide. And so again, I think that the mapping is great, but it's also got to evolve with the times.
All right, I gave you a little bit of a warning. I was going to ask you I don't know if I'll call them speed round because I'm terrible at enforcing speed round questions.
I'm terrible at doing a speed round, but let's go.
What are some ideas that you've picked up from other states where you're like, oh man, that state's doing this thing. That's such a good idea. I want to do that.
We just spoke about mapping. And so I think the mapping piece, you've seen some states get really innovative on mapping, bring in different data sets, engage, whether it's higher education or communities or other organizations on getting mapping that is most useful for communities. I think that's really important. Always has been. But I think when you look at the dollars that are available to local governments, a mapping resource that is actionable for a local community or government, I think that's really important. And there are some states out there that I think are doing really good work on the mapping front. I think the community engagement and capacity building front is really important, as we spoke to. That's something that you look at what an Office of Broadband did a decade ago. That's not what they're doing now. And so I think more and more you see that kind of work.
But you seem like you're a leader on that. Are you picking up ideas on how other states are doing that?
Well, I don't want to say that that Illinois is doing it best. It's something that we've been very intentional about doing. And I got to tell you, Christopher, my view of what other states are doing and innovating on right now in the midst of all this,
you're not doing a 50-state study. You're not traveling to every state.
That's the thing. We try to stay in touch and identify and apply best practices where we can. I would just say those are the sorts of things that I think are really important right now. I think getting to the question that you mentioned earlier, though, too, that balance between investment in what would be traditionally viewed as an area of need for broadband infrastructure investment versus the communities in urban areas telling us that their broadband is insufficient. I think states really leaning into that challenge and figuring out, hey, you know what? There's work that's got to be done on this front. We don't necessarily have the ideal model from any other state, but we want to lead on that. I think that's a really important part of this conversation. And so do I have, states to say this state or that state's doing it best? I don't know about that. I really respect a lot of the innovation I've seen in the last 2 years. It seems like many leaders at the state and community level, had been waiting for this moment. It's here, and now it's here, folks. And we're going 100 miles an hour. And so I think keeping up with what folks are doing is going to be part of the challenge, because I think we all want to be on the cutting edge. We all want to be doing what is considered best practice or leading to best practice. And I think that's going to be the challenge for folks at the state level here in the next few years. You want to innovate, you want to lead, but also taking the time to stay in touch with your peers around the country and support some great ideas that are popping up at the community level, because there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And I think there's a whole world of innovation that's going to sprout up at that state and community level that's really been boxed in for the last decade. Well, thanks to this federal funding, I think the floodgates are opening, and this is going to be a very exciting time to see that kind of innovation at the state and local level.
Vermont is doing some interesting stuff with community service districts, communications union districts, in Illinois, I think, you don't have the same sort of challenges that Vermont does. You have a lot of local independent providers. You have a lot of folks that are trying to take advantage of the money that's available. But with Vermont, I thought one of the things I thought was interesting in their circumstances, they bought a bunch of fiber. And I can imagine there's a few things. There's a lot of pieces that ISPs want to customize and get for themselves. But there's some things like conduit and whatnot where it might be interesting for the state to just buy a bunch of it during periods of the supply chain issue and then hand that out. Have you considered that at all?
Yeah, it's one of those thoughts about a year and a half ago. You think, what's the best way of facilitating investment in broadband at the state level? And you thought, should there be a fiber bank, or should there be some sort of state investment in some of the inputs to the broadband network expansion that could help speed up the investment that's going to follow through the grant program? And so I think, what you see a state like Vermont doing, it makes a lot of sense. And I think the point about the broadband districts, harkens back, we're talking about the Minnesota days, but I think creating that level of regional or community engagement where you've got, funding instruments that communities can identify and lean into for establishing, whether it's local momentum or a non-state match, I think that's really important. It's probably less important now because you have the ARPA dollars that are available directly to local governments. You've got the infrastructure funding that's coming down the pike. In an era where the funding was really the challenge and held up communities and community visions from becoming reality, I think that sort of innovative, local regional finance model was really important. I still think it's really important. It's too bad that we've had to wait so long to see this kind of innovation. But you pair that sort of approach, local, regional, visioning, financing with the federal dollars that are available to local communities, the emphasis on the regional layer when it comes to broadband access and network planning, as well as digital equity and inclusion. The next couple of years are just going to be fascinating when you look at how all these pieces fit together. And I think one thing that I think others will agree, that the shift, from federal-driven broadband solutions to more state and local-driven broadband solutions, I think is going to be welcome for many. And I think, again, it's going to unlock a lot of innovation. And so those sorts of financing tools that you speak of, those sorts of planning models, I think this is their time to shine.
I think so too, and I'm just so thrilled at the federal level that leaders there have recognized this and pushed money down to be distributed by the states. But you mentioned a fiber bank. I'm guessing you decided against it. What complicates that? What makes it not a great investment for the state?
Well, I'm not saying it's a bad investment. I think it's a unique undertaking, and so I think if you're going to go down this road, you've got to get it right. But I think when you look at I heard 72-week delays for fiber in some cases. I'm not, every provider's got a little bit different, situation. But the point is, if you're having to wait upwards of a year or more to get fiber or other key inputs into necessary deployments, perhaps states should be thinking about ways of getting ahead of that bottleneck, or just speeding up the collection of inputs. And so that's something that, I kicked the tires on. I didn't take next steps with it, because believe me, we have our hands full with our Connect Illinois grant program. But nonetheless, I think that those are sorts of approaches that states could certainly consider and are considering in terms of kind of speeding up the supply chain and heading off some of these pinch points. And so I don't want to say that we've dismissed the idea outright. It's something that you certainly could see again here in 2022. But for the time being, I think, I hope other states really lean on that, because I think that there's an opportunity.
And then the other question I wanted to ask, I'm guessing you're going to dodge this.
We'll see.
Whether it's the Benton headlines, which are great, or the Keller and Heckman digest, which anyone who's listening to this show, if you're not on both of those lists for getting your news in the morning, is there anything you could share with us where you just read a story and you're just shaking your head like, oh man, like, come on, people, come on.
Oh man. I think the thing that I would just really push back against right now, and this theme has kind of come up a little bit already in our time together today, the notion that local governments shouldn't be part of this conversation. And sorry, this is, again, I'm kind of beating the drum, but
I'm totally going to disagree with you.
Right. Exactly. Right. I'm talking to the, right audience here, but I just think that that's something that you continue to see, pressure and pushback in rhetoric, whether it's applied at, state leadership level or local communities. The idea that local governments just don't have a role in the conversation about their broadband futures. And this is something that's just, been ingrained in me for the past decade, is that if you're going to get it right, you absolutely have to have the local community's participation. And that can look differently, from one community to the next. It doesn't have to be about a specific plan. It doesn't have to be about, a local community raising a bond or applying, ARPA dollars in this case, or applying for a grant. But I think the point is they've got to be part of that conversation. And I know that you get that, and you've been at the forefront and advocating for a stronger local role for a decade plus. But I think the point is we're definitely going to see pressure against that local role in the year ahead. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a linchpin in making this historic opportunity one to remember a decade from now, and when we look back and say, it was great, but it could have been better. And so is there any one article? No, but you just see that kind of pressure. You see that tension that's out there. And I think that with the capacities that we're standing up at the state level across the country, with communities that are just chomping at the bit to be part of this conversation, I'm really optimistic that we're going to have a new approach to state, local, federal partnership among those three levels of government with our broadband provider community, and we get this right. It doesn't mean it's going to be the same sort of model in every community, but I think those are the elemental parts of a solution that can stand the test of time. And so, I don't know. I'm hopeful that we're going to see more of that, not less of it, in the years ahead.
Well, I think almost every listener to the show probably agrees with that. There's something that I don't know how all the listeners would agree with, that I'll say that I think makes me think, which is the opposite of that, which is that I feel like a lot of people assume that you and I, people in this work, hate the cable and telephone companies. And there's certain things that they've done that I do hate, but I absolutely get annoyed at people that assume that, like, my goal is to run Comcast out of business or AT&T out of business. Like, there's a line that I read that I think Harold Feld said, maybe 18 years ago or something like that, which was like, my job isn't to run these guys out of business, it's to make them work for a living. And I just you and I, we see problems and we want to try to fix them. And we don't believe the fix is bankruptcy for those companies. We think the fix is some solutions that those companies don't prefer, maybe. But it doesn't mean that we don't see a future for them, in the broadband world. And sometimes I think people that are really supportive of the work that we're doing, people who are out there doing work that we're allied with, some of them I think might want to try to kill these companies off. That might be kind of a long-term goal. And it's just not for me. It's not a motivation for me. And I just feel like it's weird even just admitting this.
Yeah, well, look how cathartic this is to speak freely here on a podcast. I think, it's going to take all of our contributions, public and private, local, state, federal, to get this right. And so I think that those challenges and frustrations in certain communities are justified, and in many cases not. I just know in my experience in Illinois, it was entirely positive working with the provider community. That wasn't necessarily true in Minnesota, far from it. Mm-hmm. But in Illinois, it's been entirely positive. And as I have worked in other states and will continue to work in other states, I think that I hope we see more of that kind of positive, constructive partnership model between the private sector and the public sector. I am optimistic because look, we've had executive leadership, and I think that's what really sets the table. In Illinois, Governor Pritzker putting broadband connectivity atop his agenda. I think that certainly set the table for constructive conversations between the public and private sectors on broadband. I think nationally, I think with broadband having the position it has had in ARPA and in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it makes me optimistic that there's constructive conversations to be had around the country. But again, you can't take that for granted. You can't assume it's just going to materialize. I think that we've been around the block long enough to know that this is going to take continual attention and nurturing. And we're not naive here, but I think in order to make the most of the investment, we've got to keep an open mind to partnerships, to leveraging private investment to the fullest, to giving that community voice a path forward. And so I'm going to say it again, man. It's all hands on deck, and I'll keep pushing that approach until I come up dry.
Yes, and I agree. That's what it comes down to for me. Sometimes we forget it. There's 330 million fellow Americans. We're in this together. And it's a heck of a lot of different solutions that we can embrace and still all, get the job done. So,
exactly.
Matt, I really appreciate your time, as always. I appreciate your public service, too. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks for all you're doing. Great to join you today.
Skayuma.
Skayuma.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at muninetworks.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@muninetworks.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Twitter. His handle is @CommunityNets. Follow muninetworks.org stories on Twitter. The handle's @muninetworks. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. You can catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Arnie Huseby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons. This was the Community Broadband Bits podcast. Thanks for listening.